Hello, this is Laura Richcreek with Laura's Voice, and this is Laura Reads Foxed Books. Welcome to Episode 5, Chapter 5 of The Misdemeanors of Nancy by Eleanor Hoyt, illustrated by Penryn Stanlaws. We are flies on the wall for another conversation between Nancy and Bobby, with Nancy doing most of the talking, and Bobby blowing smoke rings and petting Nancy's peeves here and there. Remember when I said this was a story with lots of men in it? She expands the list. However, it turns out to be a mistaken diagnosis. Chapter 5. Mistaken Diagnosis. "I may have my faults," said Nancy, looking appropriately modest, "but at any rate I have no vanity." The man who came often, being wise in his generation, made no audible comment, but he grinned, and Nancy resented the grin. "Oh, yes, of course you think that because I straighten my hat every time I pass a mirror, and because I like pretty clothes, I'm vain. But that isn't vanity. It is habit. Vanity is something bigger than that. And I've always feared I had the big kind, but my mind is relieved. I've conclusively proved that my sense of humor takes up all the space that is usually given over to vanity in a woman's head." "Who is the man?" asked the blower of smoke rings who occupied the divan. "Why should there be a man in it?" protested Nancy hotly. "Positively, the egotism of men is colossal. The pyramids ought to be knocked out of the list of the 7 wonders of the world and masculine egotism put in their place. A man thinks a woman cannot do anything, think anything, feel anything, unless a man is concerned. For my part, I could jog along very comfortably if there should be another flood and the new ark could accommodate only the feminine things. To be sure, there was a man in this story, but he was quite accidental. I know lots of interesting stories that haven't a man even in their prologues or epilogues. As for a man who grins like a Cheshire cat, I wouldn't put him in any sort of story. He isn't fit for anything literary except a tooth powder advertisement." "Tell me the story," urged Bobby, unmoved by abuse, and grinning more cheerfully than ever. Nobody really minds Nancy's bad temper. Only homely women are forced to choose between excessive amiability and unpopularity. "This story goes back to the creation," began the girl without vanity. "Passons au déluge," quoted her audience entreatingly. She frowned him down. "Jack Dutton and I were born next door to each other." "This sounds familiar. Were there apple trees in the garden?" "There were, and we ate the green apples with salt, and obtained a knowledge of evil that kept our mothers awake nights. Really, though, you know, Jack was a very nice little boy. No such muff as Adam. He always did things first and invited me into the game, and never peached and always took whippings for both of us. The modern Adam may be just as sinful as the old Adam, but at least he has learned to lie like a gentleman." Well, Nancy never can get a fair running start until she has said, "Well." Jack went away to school, and we moved to New York, and I didn't see him again or hear anything about him until this fall. One day I went to a club's ladies' day. Someone said, "May I present Dr. Dutton?" And there was Jack. He was a splendid big fellow, with grave eyes and a Van Dyke beard, and a nice voice. I knew him at once, but he didn't recognize me until I spoke. Putting up one's hair and putting down one's skirts and wearing New York clothes does make a difference, you know. The last time Jack had seen me, I had a mop of short hair and a short checked pinafore, and no shoes or stockings, and I was hanging out of a big elm tree at the front gate to watch him go by to the train. When I gurgled, "Jack!" he knew. We fell upon each other's necks and went off to a corner and scandalized my chaperone. He was a surgeon, quite a famous surgeon, if you please, and he lived near us. He wanted to call that night and take me to the theater the next night and play golf with me on Saturday. It seemed almost like a special providence that you had gone to California 2 days before and made room for him. "You didn't say anything about him in your letters," said Bobby, studying a particularly fat smoke ring with deep interest. Nancy looked surprised. "Now, Why should I write to you about him? You and he hadn't any early associations to bind you together. I thought you would rather hear about me.
It's exceedingly difficult to get a snapshot of you without finding a man in the picture. I'm reconciled to groups. When there is no man in your letters, I know I'm getting expurgated editions, and I resent it. Now, about this surgeon.
He was very nice.
We are all nice when sufficiently in love.
You should take the treatment, Bobby.
If I were any nicer than I am, you would marry me, and then who would entertain me? Does a surgeon in love show the ordinary symptoms?
Nancy laughed. The symptoms aren't different, but there were complications in this case.
Mother object?
Oh, dear, no. That wouldn't be a complication. She has always objected to you.
Your mother's anxiety is the only thing that encourages me, sighed Bobby. Go on with the story.
People talked a good deal. They hoped I was going to be sensible at last and marry an eligible man. Do you know, Bobby, I've been a great benefactor to my social circle. They must talk, and to provide them with fresh material is my chief aim in life. I'm thinking of starting a club for the promotion of polite conversation, each member guaranteeing to furnish a certain number of acts that would provide food for gossip every fortnight. There would be a woman's club uniting entertainment and philanthropy, which is more than most of them can do. Bobby shook his head.
Supererogation, my dear child. Individual feminine folly and feminine imagination will keep the wheels of gossip running. Organization and united effort aren't necessary. Just go on doing your best, alone. So far you haven't done anything to reproach yourself with. You can be relied upon for at least one topic a fortnight, and when things are slow, I'm always on hand to furnish material.
No one except Mother talks about you anymore. She has no confidence in my common sense. I'm much more rational than my family believes. I've always understood, Bobby, that you were an impossible person.
Make it improbable, suggested the detrimental serenely.
Mother liked Jack.
How much was his practice worth?
And they call women cats. Bobby, she loved him for his personal charms and virtues. So did I. I've always said I wouldn't marry a doctor, but a surgeon isn't so bad. Patients don't make up their minds in the middle of the night to have their legs cut off, and a surgeon can take his wife to evening functions without having messengers tumbling up the front steps after him all evening. I had come round to the point where I thought life with a surgeon might be endurable, when Priscilla came to spend 2 months with me. She thought Jack was splendid. After he called the night she arrived, she went into Mother's rooms, and she and Mother talked for hours. Then Priscilla came in to me and tried to look as if they had been discussing steam heat and sanitary plumbing. She reached Jack by way of the Philippines and the South African velds and dropped him into the conversation as though she hadn't thought of him since the door closed on him. She talked about his good looks and his air of distinction. She liked his eyes and thought he talked uncommonly well, and she was sure he would make a mark for himself in the world. He was the kind of man any sensible woman could love, and it was easy to see what he thought of me. Oh, she went on that way for hours. She was still talking when I went to sleep, but I didn't confide in her, because I hadn't anything to confide. I just said, yes, yes, at stated intervals. Jack came more and more often. He was a positive nuisance. I couldn't open the front door without his tumbling into the hall, and he sent flowers and candy and books and theater tickets. He was awfully nice to Priscilla, always wanted her to go with us everywhere, insisted upon it vehemently, and never left her out of anything. I appreciated that immensely. I did want her to have a good time during her visit, and some men are horrid about one's girlfriends. Now, you were never nice to Priscilla.
There's only one being I dislike more than Priscilla, and that's your Skye Terrier. It makes me vicious to see you spoon with either of them, said the man calmly.
Ugly, envious disposition you have. Jack was different. He said he thought a loyal friendship between 2 girls was a beautiful thing, and he would let me rave about Priscilla by the hour. I was ashamed sometimes after he had gone to think how much I had talked about her and how patient he had been. She admired him tremendously, never was tired of singing his praises. I went to sleep every night with the chant in my ears. She wouldn't stay in the room when he came, always made some sort of an excuse and fled, although I stormed about it. It looked horribly pointed. Priscilla wouldn't go out with us once in a blue moon, either. She'd promise, but at the last moment she would have neuralgia or tonsillitis or anything short of smallpox. She even sprained her ankle for the Yale-Princeton football game and sat around with it bandaged for days. I'm positive there wasn't a thing wrong with it, but Mother did the bandaging. Jack didn't get along as fast as he might have done with all the help he had. He was devoted and chummy, but he seemed diffident. By and by he reached the quiet, dreamy stage where he sat and stared at me by the hour, and opened and shut his mouth once in a while without saying anything. Then he got where he talked about love. In the abstract, you know, about what a woman could mean in a man's life, and what a man ought to be for the sake of a girl he loves, and men's unworthiness, and women's angelic attributes, and homes, and children, and old age, and all that sort of thing. The man who came often sat up.
"Bless my soul! Is that the way to do it? I'm afraid well, it's so long ago that I don't remember distinctly, but wasn't I inartistically direct?" he inquired anxiously.
You were. You didn't follow any of the rules of the game.
No wonder I wasn't a success. Still, there's Varden. His golf form isn't at all according to law and gospel, but he does win out. On the whole, I'll just try to keep my eye on the ball and won't change my form. Did Jack put well?
Nancy frowned. This is a serious story, Bobby. It's rude to interrupt. Jack asked my opinion about all sorts of points in love and matrimony. He couldn't get away from the subject, but he stuck to glittering generalities. He didn't have the moral courage to particularize.
I thought so. He may be good on a long drive, but I can beat his putting, murmured Bobby.
Now, I liked Jack, liked him heartily. I didn't want him to ask me to marry him unless I intended to say yes. There's a great deal of entertainment in finding out whether a man is in love, but having satisfied her curiosity, a nice girl spares a man the humiliation of being rejected if she can.
The man who came often looked impressed. Then, if she allows him to propose, it is because she intends marrying him. Nancy, this is a delicate way of breaking the glad news to me. You've made me a happy man. Suppose we drop Jack and celebrate the joyous occasion.
Nancy's cheeks were red. I mean it, she said hotly. I detest proposals. You propose every other day, but it doesn't hurt you because you aren't in earnest. I'm talking about sensitive men, capable of real feeling. I was very serious about Jack. He was honest and moral and clever and rich. There didn't seem to be a flaw in him. He would make a splendid husband, much too good for me, and it would please the family. Of course, I wasn't in love with him. I was more nearly in love with several other men, but then my tastes are low. I felt that I ought to marry Jack. At last I talked very frankly about it with Priscilla. I hadn't done that before. If I have anything to say about the men who fall in love with me, I usually say it to them, not to my girlfriends. But I did talk to Priscilla. She treated me to discourses that sounded as if she had cribbed them from Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius. She was positively oracular. Her ideas on the holy state of matrimony ought to be published and found in every home. She didn't think I ought to cherish foolish ideas of love. The volcanic, absorbing passion hadn't any decent existence. It belonged to French novels and the lower classes. Respect and liking and confidence were the things on which to begin housekeeping. Incidentally, it was well to have a bank account. It fostered the respect and confidence. Here was a man of men, a paragon of all the virtues, much too good for me. He adored me and couldn't help making me happy. It would be absurd, mawkish, suicidal to say no to him, just because it didn't give me nervous chills to hear his footsteps in the front hall. I had heard Mother talk that way, but Priscilla was most convincing. She should go in for matrimonial promoting as a profession. There'd be a fortune for her in it. She quite brought me around. Her logic was irrefutable. I still sighed for the nervous chills, but I made up my mind that I must get along without them, and marry virtue incarnate. in the shape of the surgeon. One night I cried floods of tears and had an auto-da-fe of dreams and sentiment. The next day I told Priscilla I would allow Jack to propose, and would accept him that afternoon when he dropped in for tea. Priscilla went out to make calls, and I put on my pink gown and the expression of an early Christian martyr. I had an awful conviction that I was going to flunk at the fence, but at least I would make a brave start. Jack didn't come. At 6 o'clock Priscilla came in with a horrible headache, and asked me just to let her alone and not allow anyone to go to her room. I was sorry for her, but I felt like a criminal reprieved at the gallows. Jack didn't come that night. The next day I had a note apologizing. Rush of work, would be up in a few days. I asked Priscilla if she didn't think it queer, and she did. She was awfully nice to me, seemed to think I was feeling badly, and rubbed around and purred and made a doormat of herself for me. I never knew her to be so devoted and humble. She told me how much nicer and prettier and nobler I was than she had ever dreamed of being. She said she wasn't worthy to tie my shoelaces. She swore she never had loved a friend as she loved me, and that she couldn't be disloyal to me if she tried. She gave me her best shell comb and tried to make me take her pearl locket. I wasn't used to such devotion, and it made me tired. I couldn't live up to it, and I didn't want to hurt her feelings. One day Mother came to me and asked if I knew what she had done to offend Priscilla. She said the child hardly spoke to her, and seemed anxious to avoid being alone with her. Jack didn't turn up that week nor the next, and then the third week I met the English war correspondent, and I didn't have time to think about Jack until just before Christmas. Priscilla and I had come in from the theater, and I had a Christmassy goodwill toward men mood. I'm going to write to Jack Dutton and ask him what's the matter, I said. Priscilla jumped. Oh, I wouldn't, she gasped, and then she blushed scarlet. I stared at her. Why not? I asked. It's the queerest thing I ever heard of, the way he has dropped an old friend. My conscience is clear, and something's wrong, and I'm going to know what it is. She wriggled. Priscilla, I said sternly, you know something about Jack, something that explains the whole thing. She vowed she didn't. Priscilla should never lie. Of course her efforts are all wrong morally, and then they are so crude that they haven't any artistic value. I took her by the shoulders and fixed her with an eagle eye. She opened and shut her mouth helplessly and began to cry. It wasn't my fault, she said. I never guessed, and it was perfectly ridiculous, and she'd be stringing words yet if an auroral dawn hadn't occurred in my alleged brain. You don't mean that it was you all the time? I gasped. She was a picture of guilt. One might have thought she had our spoons in her pockets. She plumped down on the floor and hid her face in my lap. I was paralyzed for one thunderstruck moment. Then I howled for glee. Priscilla looked up at me with a weak, watery smile and asked me if I was angry. Angry? Why, I wouldn't have missed it for worlds. The more I thought about it, the funnier it got. It was such an all-embracing joke. Everybody was in it. Think of Jack's impotent rage when Priscilla kept sliding out and leaving him alone with me. Think of Mother being Machiavellian and having her hopes. Think of Priscilla religiously keeping out of the way. And oh, Bobby, think of me, sitting up nights to decide whether I'd better marry him and shearing him off from a proposal, which all the time he was trying to screw up courage to tell me he was madly in love with Priscilla.
How did Priscilla find out the truth?
Asked Bobby with a sympathetic chuckle. Jack met her on the street. He took her into the park and uncorked his soul. It was a volcanic eruption. He had loved her at first sight. She must know it. Everyone must have known it. He couldn't live without her. She was heartless, cruel. She told him she had thought I was it, that we had all thought so. That stunned him. Poor Jack. Priscilla vowed she would never see him again and then ran home and cried all night. It was a tragedy to her. It never entered her head that I would think the thing funny. I'm glad I'm not built upon proud or tragic lines, Bobby. I wrote to Jack that night and told him that I would forgive him for trifling with my young affections, and that if he'd kindly come up and make love to Priscilla, I'd take the war correspondent out for a walk and try to repay well-meant services. He came. They are engaged. If any young man wants me to believe he is in love with me now, he has to swear to it before a notary. I'm not staving off any proposals. Let them all come. I don't know whether they are mine or Priscilla's until it's all over.
End of Chapter 5, Mistaken Diagnosis. Well, 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 Nancy. How the turntables... The Office fans will know. By the end of the whole affair, Nancy's response is laughter. I respect that about her. She states, "I'm glad I'm not built upon proud or tragic lines, Bobby." What do you think she means? And for self-reflection, what lines do you see yourself, or your family, built upon? Feel free to comment below or just think about it. If this happened to you, how would you react? Has it happened to you? This has been The Misdemeanors of Nancy by Eleanor Hoyt, illustrated by Penryn Stanlaws. Original copyright 1902. This work is in the public domain. Production copyright 2025 by Laura E. Richcreek. Thanks for listening. Hey, be sure to catch the enrichment notes in their own video. You can listen to them before or after the chapter video. Let me know what you decide to do and how that worked for you. See you in the next video.